and welcome to yet another live drawing party. Today is Thursday, May 7th, and we are starting at a slightly later time than normal. And for those of you who are confused by that, I apologize. As you know, one of my superpowers is the ability to confuse and distract you so that you are forced to come up with spontaneous solutions to the many problems I've thrown your way, such as, well, changing the schedule. So today's schedule is a little bit later because we were having our monthly staff meeting at Sketchbook School. Once a month, everybody gets together and we talk about what's been going on and what is going to be going on. And today was that day. And because of the fact that we have Kosha in Amsterdam, we have me here in Phoenix, we have people in California, we have people in New York and Ohio, spread all the way across the time zones. This was the only time we could do it. So I hoped that you would understand. And if you've shown up, I hope that indicates that you have. So thank you. I really appreciate that. So a lot of things to talk about today. The last session that we had was a couple days ago, and we talked about a lot of things, including emotion and meaning and, the suppression of emotion, the suppression of meaning, grief, guilt, a lot of heavy topics. And today we're going to take it lighter. Today we have first, let me announce what our project is going to be, because it's a very open-ended project that you can work on it any way you want to. And today's project is to make something happy. Make a drawing, do a painting, do something that's happy. That's happy. Interpret that however you want to. I'm going to see how I interpret it. I'm not sure yet. I'm going to start drawing at some point, and we'll see what comes out. Hopefully I will channel happiness. So I'm hoping that is a good thing for you. Yes, people commenting on my pinkness. Yes, I am. I've been exposed to 106, 107 degree temperature. I've slathered myself with sunblock, but nonetheless, this is sort of the robust look of the Westerner, which is what I've assumed and adopted. But yes, I'm looking pink in celebration of happy pinkness. So go with it. Go with it, people. All right. So as I said, Tuesday was, I don't know how you felt, but I felt for the next day or so, I felt, I wouldn't say discomfort, but I felt the after effects of purging. Like if you've been sick and then you're getting better, but in between you feel kind of, I was feeling a little shaky, a little vulnerable for about 24 hours, but I feel good now, and I hope you do too. It was a tough one. I got a lot of emails from people who attended and participated, telling me how they had felt, and that was really gratifying. I really loved hearing from you, and I loved hearing your impressions of this. If you would like to be in touch with me, or you would like me to be in touch with you more aptly, I would recommend that you sign up. Let me just get rid of this for a second. That you sign up for my list. sketchbookskool.com/Danny's-list. Those people who have been getting these email essays from me. We just prepared the one that we're going to send out tomorrow at noon. So tomorrow you will be getting a new one. But I'm trying to write them every week, but a lot of people have been reading them and writing back to me because they are emails from me that I send to you. So if you reply to them, I will get your response, and that is very nice. So go to sketchbookskool.com/Danny's-list, sign up for it, and you'll get it. End of story. There's nothing else to concern yourself with. What other things do we have to talk about? If you make some happy art today and you want to share it, #SBS Drawing Party means that I'll get a chance to track it down and see it. You can put that on any form of social media, and I will get to see it. And okay, I think that. Oh, and I also, of course, wanted to talk about this amazing amazing workshop that we have coming up with Onmar. Perhaps you got an email about it today, just telling you some more about it. It is going to be spectacular, and it is only a week away, and we're going to close the signups later in the week. So you might want to make sure you get in on this one. It's going to be teaching you a technique that I think is spectacular and will transform your sketchbook work. So if you would like to start using watercolor, or zing up your watercolor, or figure out how to add color to your drawings, or learn new ways to express yourself, or just have a really fun time, this is going to be it. It's going to be really good. Our workshops, by the way, keep getting better. They were each one has its technical challenges, has its structural challenges, but I think each one is getting better. This one with Onmar is amazing. It's beautiful, it's fun and interesting, and I think it's going to be really good. So by all means, if you're interested in doing it, just go to sketchbookschool.com/workshops and join us. So I think you'll have a lot of fun there. It is going to be cool. Thank you, Morgan. She just added to the comments too. Okay, yes, Cynthia, it is now. This is now. Cynthia Zick, it is 10:39 here in Phoenix, Arizona. This is live. Okay, let's talk about some other things besides all this housekeeping stuff. First of all, I want to remind you, just start working on this project that I just put up there, okay? Just so I don't have to think about what you're doing. Just work on the project, make something happy. I'm going to assume that you're starting on that while I blather a bit. So years ago, I worked in advertising, and the last agency that I worked at, I was there for quite a while. And there was a man who I knew at this advertising agency who worked in the finance department, accounts receivable, billing, expense reports, all those kinds of things, bookkeeping, the financial department, right? And I became friends with him for a number of reasons. The first reason was probably because his name is Michael Jackson. Memorable name. And Michael R. Jackson, but Michael Jackson nonetheless. And he is an African-American man who is, he's gay, and I guess that's about all. if any of those qualities refer to Michael Jackson anymore. But other than that, he's his own man. And Michael, I met Michael because I would go in and hand in my paperwork, and I would end up talking to him every time because he was just a fascinating guy. He was just really hilarious. And I always wondered, like, what are you doing working in the finance department? But that's where he worked. That was his job. I always remember once at the Halloween party for the agency, he dressed up as the dead Michael Jackson. Anyway, so Michael, eventually, he and I both left the agency at around, I don't know if it was the same time. Over the years we left. But we still stayed in contact with each other because we were both on Facebook, and we were Facebook friends. And the thing that interested me about Michael was that he was a writer, and he was doing a lot of theatrical stuff. He would write skits and play sort of short plays and things like that. And he was always taking workshops, or then eventually he was getting like internships. But he was still working in finance, I guess, in other places. But he was doing these various theatrical related projects that he worked on in his spare time. And then he invited me, or I guess he invited me. Yeah. He invited me to a one-act play that he had done, and I went to see it, and it was fantastic. It was like one of those things. I was just amazed and impressed by him at what he had done. And then the next year, he had written a musical, which was really hilarious, and it was like a musical camp version of Valley of the Dolls. It was based on some. It had a lot of different influences, like Beverly Hills 90210. There were all kinds of things that went into it, but it happened to be at Michael's Pub, which is part of the Public Theater in New York. So that was like a big step up. So here he is, no longer in the finance department. He's now like kind of putting his effort into it, and he had that was pretty impressive. And I went to it. It was like a one-night thing, but it was really fun. And it was interesting. And, I congratulated him on it. It was great. Then last year, he wrote a bigger play, and that play was put on in an off-Broadway theater. And we went to it, and it was phenomenal. It was really great. It was funny. It was sort of semi-autobiographical, but it was just really powerful and had music and it was nothing I'd ever seen before. So the reason I'm telling you about this is that 2 days ago, Michael R. Jackson, the funny guy in the accounting department, won the Pulitzer Prize for drama. I mean, I'm getting chills up my back just saying this to you. He won the Pulitzer Prize for drama, the best play in the last year. And I'm talking about like a Tony, the Pulitzer Prize, all right? It leaves me speechless. I mean, I've said this to myself every day for the last 3 days. Like, Michael Jackson won the Pulitzer Prize. And I wrote to him and I was just like, I said, I just don't even really know what to say to you because this is such an incredible achievement. I mean, it's the highest honor you can get as a playwright. And, and he did this whole, essentially supporting himself by working, as a bookkeeper, finance guy. So whatever you're thinking, whatever plans you have, whatever alternate paths your life might have taken, draw inspiration from Michael R. Jackson because it was phenomenal. It was so great, and I'm just so proud of him. I mean, it's one of the most amazing things I've experienced in a long time. Was to see his name in the New York Times. It was absolutely shocking. I mean, I always look at the Pulitzer Prize things, and I was like, how could that possibly be? It was like, I mean, throughout this whole thing that's been going on for the last 2 months, Jenny and I have had these conversations about whether or not we actually, our plane crashed when we were flying to Palm Springs and we're dead. And this whole thing is like a construction. It's a virtual reality construction. And Michael R. Jackson winning the Pulitzer Prize is one more devious trick that whoever came up with this whole scenario put into it. It amazed me. Other interesting things that happened in the New York Times this week were these 2 articles. One of them you might have seen was a couple days ago. The Big Impact of a Small Hobby, an article by John Donahue. John Donahue wrote this, or illustrated a book called The Best Restaurants in New York, or All the Restaurants in New York, where he drew the facades of every restaurant in New York. But this article, which is in the Times, and a couple of people have sent it to me, and thank you for sending it to me. I did devour it when it first came out. So this came out on May 1st, and it is about how, it is basically Sketchbook Skool in an article. It is my story in an article about how he went through tremendous change in his life, tremendous sort of disruption, and started to draw. And he started to draw the dish rack every day. He's made over 1,000 drawings of the dish rack, sometimes twice a day. So, but this is also about what all the things that drawing gave him and how he came to it. I strongly urge you to read it. The New York Times, May 1st. Just go look for The Big Impact of a Small Hobby. The article isn't just about drawing. He's really saying, find a hobby, people. But I would say start drawing. Then in today's paper, how to draw in 6 steps. Anyone can draw. We can prove it to you. Here's an article, same kind of thing. This article in today's Times, they took a guy who's like a business reporter, and they taught him how to draw a coffee mug in 6 steps. And they talk about why you should learn to do this, why everybody should learn to do it. So, need I say more? Haven't I said this often enough? Not that I need the New York Times to confirm what I'm saying, but I'm just so glad that people are thinking about this, particularly now. Like, we need this, and this is the time to do it. So this is very nice, and share it with your friends, particularly the ones who are in the finance department or who are business reporters or who, I don't know, should learn to draw like all of us. Okay, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. Today, my theme is how to create a creator. And so I wanted to talk about parenting. Now, I know you may not be a parent, but you probably had parents, and they probably play some role, good, bad, and possibly indifferent, in your creative development. And so let's just talk a bit about that because Mother's Day is coming up. And, you know, we all had mothers. What role did they play in our creativity today? Did they suppress it? Did they support it? Did they encourage it? Did they seem to be the source of it? Did you have really creative parents? Was that a good thing? Did that help you? Did it inhibit you? My own story is my parents are sort of creative. I mean, my father is fairly creative, but my parents were divorced when I was about 1.5 years, 2 years old. So I didn't really grow up with my father at all and don't know an enormous amount about him, but he does still sort of paint. Never for anybody to see but himself, but he does paint. So I sort of always grew up with that feeling that, like, yeah, that's sort of in my background. You know, I didn't have him around to encourage me to do it, but yeah, it was sort of there. And then my mother, yeah, both of my parents are psychologists. No need to say anything more about that. But you know, my mother is, you know, not an uncreative person. She's certainly a person with style, and you know, and great handwriting. In fact, let me show you this. You might have seen this before. I made this film. Was it earlier this year? A little while ago. But this is a little film I made about my mother. Well, it's a pretty cold autumn morning, and I'm on my way to my mother's house to see how she's doing and to see what she is up to. This is her basement workshop. A few years ago, she started to make art, mixed media art. But she didn't use rubber stamps or stencils. She didn't decoupage old steel engravings. My mom invented an art form all of her own. Her mixed medium is leaves. Big leaves, beautiful leaves, exotic leaves. She presses them and dries them and combines them with calligraphy. She calls it leafages. She collects all kinds of leaves wherever she travels, and she brings them home and combines them with quotations and poems and prayers. And she turns them into art. My mom's always had beautiful handwriting and a very green thumb. She just loves nature and poetry, and this art form, it's very her. She says art making is very calming and relaxing and fun. And she can't wait to get back to her pens and her glue and make the next one. My mom, the mixed media artist. I spoke to my mom yesterday. She's doing fine. She is in that house. She lives by herself, and so she's kind of used to being by herself. She's fine with it. I think she's also the news director for her local radio station, public radio station. So she's always on top of what's going on, and she kind of manages a bunch of volunteer reporters, and she's very engaged. So that's great. But I have to say that when I was a kid, you know, I think my mother she certainly wasn't disruptive when it came to any kind of creative impulses I had. I don't think that she was, she certainly didn't say like you should become an artist, you should become a writer. I don't think that was really in her makeup to tell me what to do in that way. My mother's always led her own life, and that's really what it's been about. But I think that, and when I grew up, she didn't make those kinds of things that she's making in that. I mean, again, her handwriting was always beautiful. I always remember that. But she was involved with work. She was involved with getting her PhD. It wasn't really a thing. So I don't think that I had any particular encouragement from her. And it's possible that that's why I kind of strayed off this path for as long as I did, because there wasn't necessarily anybody in my life saying, this matters to you. This is important. You should keep doing it. Or why don't you delve into that? So, I thought a lot about that with when it came to my being a parent or contemplating being a parent. Was I going to know how to do it, to be there for my child? Was I going to be confident enough to allow him, as it turned out, Jack, to go with what he thought was in his nature? Or was I going to be worried about it and just try and steer him in another direction? How involved should one be as a parent? How do you create the right environment for a child to be creative? Because I've always believed that creativity is a really important life skill to have. And, I wanted to make sure that I could do that. So I'm just going to think a bit more about that and talk a bit about it. But I thought it would be nice if we drew together while we talk about this. So why don't we start doing that? Why don't you, get out your gear and let's do some drawing while we talk about what do we think about the role of our family, about being a creator. Is it nature? Like, is it in who we are? Let me just remind you, for those of you who have joined late, what our theme is. Today's project is to make something happy, whatever form that takes for you. So, can you be supportive? But also, your responsibility as a parent is also to, prepare your kid for life. And the fact that they like to play video games doesn't necessarily mean that you want to encourage them to become a professional video game player, but maybe you do, and maybe they'll go on to do something incredible with that skill, or maybe they'll just become bums living in your basement. I don't know. Right? Those are the things we think about as parents. Are we doing the right thing for our kids? What are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to just give them good schools and a lot of after-school programs? What examples are we supposed to set for them? For me, the path that I took, I deviated, from a creative path, and I was suddenly working in an ad agency, hanging out with Michael Jackson in the finance department. I wasn't drawing. So, and is that really what I wanted to tell my son to be? What if, again, he ended up working in Starbucks the rest of his life because I had said to him I thought it would be a good idea to go to art school? You know what I mean? Nothing wrong with working in Starbucks. A lot of people, I'm sure, would love to work at Starbucks. I think there are also, I've certainly heard lots of stories from people whose parents were so worried or so didn't understand what it would mean to take a creative path that they discouraged their kids. Said, don't do that. That would be a complete calamity. What are you talking about? You can't become an artist. That's nuts. So, did that happen to you? And did it affect how you felt as a parent? Did you think that in the end was the right path to take? Did your when it came time for you to advise your kids, did you say, you know, don't do what I did, or make sure you do what I did? Make sure you follow the advice that your grandparents gave me. It's such a big responsibility being a parent, isn't it? It's like, it's crazy. It's crazy. It's kind of amazing that we can even do it. You know, that we can even dare to be parents. It's nuts. I often thought that. I was often like, what the hell am I doing? I'm not qualified for this. Particularly since I didn't really have particularly strong parents myself. That's not true. That's not fair to say. My parents were, they were my parents. I am what I am. But I didn't necessarily learn to be a parent from stuff that they told me to do. Like, make sure you always tell your kid to floss and brush. Yeah, I mean, Laura says here, my Depression era parents discouraged creativity and encouraged practicality. Ironically, during the Depression, being an artist was actually a way to get a job, right? You could be in the WPA program, you could actually get a job. But yes, absolutely, it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You can't go out and just suddenly start, drawing and think of those cliches of the artist, like living in a garret with nothing. How could you, when you'd lived through something like the Depression, do that? And what about now? What about now? The times that we're living through. Are future parents going to dissuade their kids from being creative? Because of what it might do to their future? I think it's a very real possibility. And if you're a grandparent, what are you doing about your grandchildren's creativity? Do you feel like you can influence it, or is it meddling in your kids' business? I don't know. I'm not a grandparent, but I do tell my son how to raise his dog. I don't really. I'm not drawing an analogy between grandchildren and my son's dog, but you know what I mean. But I do. I mean, I have to say, when my son was thinking about going to college, I did something that I think, I could have lived to really regret, which is I said to him, go to art school. You really like drawing. But my son was also really good at lots of things. I mean, he's a really good writer. He's smart. He has good social skills. There are a lot of things he could have become. And I said to him, well, what, you feel free to do this. I'm not telling you to do it, but what I do think is, if you just go and get a liberal arts degree, what will happen to you? If you graduate with a degree in English, what will you do with that? Whereas if you I didn't quite follow through and say, well, if you graduate with a degree in painting, what will you do with it? But I don't regret at all the advice that I gave to him. And I think that he's happy for it. And I think he's managed to make his way in the world, despite all that. He's a good kid. He's doing well. So that's all good. But it could have gone wrong. And I'll always remember being in the elevator with one of my neighbors and Jack. And Jack had just gotten into RISD, Rhode Island School of Design. And my neighbor said, so Jack, where are you going to go to college? What are you going to major in? And Jack said, I'm going to be a painter. And the neighbor kind of looked at me. Very small motion, like, And I just kind of looked back at him blankly. I didn't go like, yeah, I know. Oh no, I'm going to go and spend much money did I spend? I don't want to tell you how much money I spent to make a painter. I always remember a friend of mine whose son went to, who was a frustrated jazz drummer, and he kind of molded his son, and his son became a really good jazz guitarist. And one day after a concert that we went to, another one of our friends said to my friend, the dad, "Congratulations, you've created a jazz musician. Now what?" So like that's, yeah, I know that feeling. But I have to say that encouraging my son to do what he's doing has prepared him for the world that we're living in now, because he's a creative person, a resourceful person, a person who doesn't think that there's an easy way to do things, didn't have things handed to him ever in his work life, and I think is really well prepared for whatever's coming next. You know, let me just point up what Jeanette's saying here, because I think that's really quite worth talking about. Jeanette says, "I wish I had had the courage to go to art school. There's joy in doing what you love. But working in art does not mean you will be making what you love, but what clients tell you to make." You know, I mean, I spent my career in advertising working with clients, sometimes getting them to pay for what I loved. But yes, it's definitely, you're making something in the service of others. And the question is, that's if you're a commercial artist. But I think even if you're not, if you're a gallery artist, you might still find that you are working in the service of your collectors, or of the gallerists, or of the critics. Yeah, there's certainly going to be other people who are affecting what you do. Is that reason enough not to do it? I think that's the question we have to ask ourselves, right? Like, yeah, that might happen. So you can't be a pure whatever it is you want it to be. It can't be a pure thing. So now, should you do it or not do it? Is it better to do it 80%, 90%, or not do it at all? I don't have the answer to that. That's only you have that answer. You know, what will you regret that if you didn't do it? Do you ever really regret things that you do? I mean, I think of all the regrets I have in my life, the things I regret are the things I didn't do. I'm sure that's true of a lot of people. You know, sometimes you make a blunder and you go, "Oh, shoot, I should never have done that with my life." But by and large, I think we regret the things we didn't do. And so as a parent, do you think about that? You know, is that one of your biggest concerns with being a parent? Corrine says, "I gave my kids materials for many creative abilities. One is now a professional photographer. All three are doing the same for their kids. Many activities, but not focus on one." So does that mean you're trying to make sure that they don't focus enough on the thing to become professional at it? I mean, that's a strategy. I don't really know. Is that a good or a bad thing? Is that a form of is that like a putting in a safety valve? You know, if you spend all your time learning to play the jazz guitar, you're going to become a jazz guitarist, and then what? Is that the problem? Maybe. And then you say, "Oh, if only I also taught him to be a baker, and also taught him to knit." Yeah, maybe. Maybe that's a good strategy. What do you guys think? Laura says, "I've been drawing with my granddaughter because I feel that drawing can be applied to many other creative endeavors." It's true. I think that's a really good reason. I think It's probably really fun. I think she'll also always have associations around drawing connected with you. She'll always feel warmly about that. She'll always look back and say, I used to draw with my grandmother. She believed in it enough to spend time doing it with me. She used to draw too. I remember that. And so it gets passed on. Her associations with drawing are going to be positive ones. Doesn't necessarily mean she's going to become a professional artist. Who cares? But as you say, she might become a creative anything. And it's not just necessarily the drawing skills. Yes, if she becomes a tailor, she can draw designs. If she becomes a carpenter, she can sketch up floor plans. I'm sure that's not what you mean. I'm sure you mean instead the ability to think creatively. That's the fun thing about playing around with art stuff, is it just taps into that part of your brain. I'm sure that's part of what you're talking about. I think to represent that in your kid's life, even if your own children haven't necessarily had that or didn't have enough of that around them because you hadn't come to terms with your own creativity, right? That's often what happens. We haven't come to terms with it ourselves yet when our kids are still young. Why? Because we're working, God damn it. We don't have time for ourselves when our kids are young. So often it's the grandparents who can be that influence for people. So I think that's really important. That's another thing we want to remember. The role that we play in people's lives is that's a way of supporting our kids, is by being good grandparents. I've tried to teach my son's dog to draw. The damn thing won't respond. Just isn't interested. Ate a pencil once. That's about it. So Finella says, my mother was so creative. She drew and painted. She sewed. She makes baskets. She refinished furniture. She was part of a group that put on puppet shows. That sounds like incredible fun. Incredible fun to have a person like that in your life. I mean, that's what I've tried to be with my son, is to just be that person who's around doing stuff with him, who's like, oh yeah, my dad does that. I wanted to always be that for him, and I think that is in the end what I was able to do for him, was to be just, a person who's like, it's okay. Just do it. I like it. It's fun. I mean, I've also heard from other people, and this is a completely other kind of problem, which is that you have a parent who's very creative, like who's professionally creative, a famous creative person who's a parent, that the kid can actually feel overwhelmed by it, overshadowed, intimidated, and then what? So that's another thing, you have to think about is what if you're too much of an influence and you intimidate them into becoming, I don't know, instead of being an actor, they become like, a talent agent. I've never asked Michael Jackson about his mother and his father and what influence they played on him before he started to write. I know that he wrestled with a lot of things because he was, being gay, being African American in America. I mean, there were a lot of obstacles and things that he had to overcome. Not overcome, but contend with. In fact, that's what a lot of his work is about. Oops, almost dropped my pencil. So, Teresa says, why not let them find their own way? Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's another thing that I also thought about. It's like, what if my son wanted to become a lawyer or an accountant, and I kind of made him into being a painter? It's like the opposite of the cliche. Yeah, I think I tried to let my son find his way. I just didn't want to. But I also felt like as a parent, it was my job to sort of say this is also a possibility. Like society may not really set you up to be an artist. Society will tell you lots of reasons why you shouldn't be. So I want to at least, counter that in some way and say it's possible if that's what you want to do. I think if he really didn't want to do that, I absolutely would not have felt it. But who knows? I might have felt like, oh, well, he's going to fulfill the thing I never did. Right? It's a thing you can think about. I mean, it's an endless quandary. Julie has the right idea. I'm sharing Sketchbook School with my grandson. We often tune into the sketch party, even though we live on opposite sides of the country. Now we're doing 2 weeks of art boot camp together. I love that. That is fantastic. What could be more fun than both starting and learning? Like, you're not necessarily teaching him. He's learning alongside you. He may advance beyond you. You have this thing that you did together. I love that idea. I think boot camp, particularly the first couple weeks of it, are about drawing. It's a really fun thing to do together. And I strongly recommend that. Of course, self-interest notwithstanding, I think it's really great, really fun. Maybe I can get Jack to let his dog, maybe we could, I've been hearing about virtual dog training sessions. Maybe that's the thing to talk about. What else? Iris the Flower says, yes, I think there are enough people telling those kids why everything but art is important. It sounds really refreshing to have a parent tell them the opposite. It's true. It's true. Parents can lead their kids astray. But I think it's always good to have some kind of a mentor figure in a kid's life who represents these things. I mean, I had a kind of a nutty teacher in high school who sort of represented that to me. He was kind of like a strange Marxist hippie who kind of represented to me the idea that you could kind of go your own way. Didn't necessarily want to go his way, but I thought it was cool to have a teacher that wasn't an authority figure, but was nonetheless, an interesting guy to be around and say like, oh yeah, you could do that. You could do that. Joanne says, I was a struggling artist and my kids were both creative. My daughter decided to major in science, then came to me crying in 11th grade and said, I have to be an artist. How old is she now? Does she still feel that way? It's true. Chris brings up a good point. What message do we send when we defund art programs and promote endless standards? It comes back to the same thing, which is like, can you imagine in today's climate somebody deciding that, yeah, we've got to really fund the arts and we've got to encourage kids to be artists. I mean, I wrote this piece on my blog years ago called Why We Should Eliminate Art from Schools. And it was sort of meant to be sort of a Swiftian, modest proposal in which I suggested something kind of really outrageous just to see what it would be like to talk about it. And ultimately what I was saying in this article that became quite controversial, I think I've gotten more hate mail about it than anything else I've ever written. I was trying to say, what if instead we create creativity programs? Because creativity seems to be something that's a bit more in vogue. You can sort of imagine in business people talk about creativity. In the government, probably not yet, but maybe. But art, no. No. We have no. If we're going to cut something, we don't need kids finger painting in high school. They got to get into good schools. But then I thought, what? Creativity? What if we just take basically what we're doing in art programs and just call it creativity? And then maybe we start to form connections between what's happening in that creativity program and what's happening in other departments of the school. What if creativity in science, creativity in math, creativity in literature, creativity in sports? What if there are suddenly connections that we can make between those departments? What if we can teach kids these skills, creative skills, that they're never going to learn? They're not going to learn them in college. College, they don't teach creativity. Problem solving, collaboration, how to inspire yourself, examples of creative thinking from the past. It's not taught in schools, but what if it was? What if that's what art teachers, former art teachers now were responsible for? Wouldn't they get a seat at the table? I think that they would. I think it was worth talking about. So yes, we still need to to encourage people to be creative and to make art, yes. But what if we take the whole controversy around it off the table and say instead, yeah, we recognize that people need this skill. It is a skill. There are things that you learn. I learned it working in advertising over the course of 30 years. I learned it on the job. I didn't come to it with those skills. And I'm not talking about specific skills about like how to make the particular things, but it was how to think creatively. That's what I paid a lot of money for my son to go to art school to learn. Not how to be a painter necessarily, but how to think creatively, how to collaborate. What are the steps that you take when you have a really insurmountable problem in front of you? We don't learn that. Not discreetly. You might learn it in passing. Right? We learn how to solve a math problem. We don't learn how to solve a lot of the other problems that take enormous leaps of faith, that take enormous change, the things that we're going through right now, right? We're trying to solve problems that have never been solved before. That's creativity, right? We're trying to bring things we might have solved part of that problem over there, and then there's a part of this problem over here, and then there's some completely unrelated form of we could bring in, and that seems to apply, right? Because they're talking about like bringing in, aren't they talking about like llamas and CRISPR and studying what people have done 100 years ago? It's all these different forms of thinking that are coming to bear on this problem, right? It doesn't matter how you solve the problem. God damn it, just solve it. And that's what creativity is about. That's how artists think. They don't think about making money first and foremost. They don't think about doing it the way it's always been done in tradition. They think about new ways of doing things. Innovation. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Failing and trying again. I think those are really important skills. I wish that my son had been taught those in school so I didn't have to send him to art school to learn them, but I'm glad that ultimately I did. Jan makes a really good point. All creativity is an act of species adaptation. I remember talking about that in the very first class we did at Sketchbook School, talking about birds, bower birds, that create specialized kinds of nests to attract their mates that are works of art. But also all the different ways in which animals adapt. Now, it's not necessarily a creative decision. Ultimately, nature itself is creative, right? Nature itself selects the solutions that work the best, and those are the ones that advance and continue, right? But it's only by trying out a lot of different things that those adaptations occur. Different beaks and different behaviors and all that stuff, right? It's random, but it's also ultimately filtered towards success. And those are the kinds of things we have to, again, think about when it comes to creative thinking. Yes. All right, I'm sorry. I've gone off on this rant. I plan to make a happy drawing. He isn't looking happy yet. Maybe he will later on. It's like, what is this drawing? Anyway, let's walk away, step away from him for a minute. I'm at a bit of a quandary because I want to draw every day, and I'd like to draw with you, but I also like talking about these things, and I'm glad to have you to talk to me about them. Kat says, I live in Australia and work part-time at an art supply shop. We haven't closed during COVID-19. We are so busy, busier than Christmas with I haven't painted in 30-year customers and online art class learners and homeschool students. Awesome. Kat, if any of them are interested in taking a workshop, might I suggest that they check out the Brush Online Watercolor and Ink workshop with Owen Marwin, which is coming up soon. Yes, this has been an incredible time for art. I talked about those articles in the New York Times. When was the last time the New York Times wrote articles, multiple articles in the same week about telling people to draw? Would have made my job a lot easier if they'd been doing it more often. We're coming back to these homespun truths, right? Bake your own bread. maybe cut your own hair, whatever, plant vegetables, spend time together, play cards, eat out of cans, have cans in your basement with food in them. We're coming back to these essential things. What's happened over the last century to us that we've forgotten these things? The fact is that people have made art for as long as people have been people, right? There are cave paintings that are far older than any other thing that people have made. Survived way longer than buildings, than financial plans, than governments, than anything else. We've always been makers. We've always gone back to that. We tell stories. We express ourselves through the things that we make. We understand the world from when we are 4 or 5 years old. We learn to experience the world and process what we're learning by making stuff, by making art. With a crayon in our hand, a 3-year-old is learning to understand the world around them, learning language, learning to communicate, learning to process. It is built into who we are. And yet, we do everything we can to diminish it, to suppress it. And 99% of adults don't do any form of it anymore. And yet, when there's a crisis, it's not the spare time, it's that there's a crisis. And during a crisis, we look for meaning. That's how I learned to make art, because of a crisis. And we're in a crisis now, and we have to go back to it. And each of us, as I've said this to you before, each of us has to evangelize for this. The New York Times is evangelizing for it. You do it too. Get out there and tell people to start drawing and draw with them. Get on Zoom and have a drawing party. Draw with your grandchildren. Encourage your kids to do the same. This is a really important tool for our times and for all times, but let's deal with now and see what happens. All right, I better get off. We have to move a piano, so I better get going. We have to move a piano. We'll have a piano in the house that's currently in my mother-in-law's house, so we got to go. People, I've been told to try and shorten these things, and here I have. My wife is standing here laughing at me because, yet again, I have prattled on for almost an hour. I apologize to her, possibly to you, and I'll see you next Tuesday. In the meantime, try and make this happy art that I failed to make today. Sign up for my list if you haven't already, sketchbookskool.com/Danny's list. If you sign up today, you will get an email from me today and then another one tomorrow. What else? One more. Go to the sketchbookskool.com/guide. That is our creativity guide, our Corona creativity guide. It's full of all the resources that we've been making to help you through these times. Read this article in the New York Times about the dish rack. Look at this drawing guide that the New York Times published, how to draw in 6 steps. And whatever you do, get over and sign up for this workshop with Onmar. No matter what your level, this is an incredible skill that you're going to learn, an incredible technique. We will be doing it next Saturday. And not this Saturday, but the following Saturday. And it will be an incredible hour or 2 of your life that I think will... This is the time to evangelize. Get some other people to sign up and take this with you. Grandchildren, whoever it is. This is a skill that anybody can apply and learn. The brush and line, watercolor, and ink workshop with Onmar Wynn. Okay. Thanks very much for joining me. I will see you. You'll see Kosha, by the way, here tomorrow at noon, and you'll see me next Tuesday. Thanks for drawing with me. See you again next time.